Kevin, good afternoon. Wanted to have a chat with you about your life so far, your young life, and can we please start by asking you to kick off with a 2-minute overview about your career to date by telling us who you are and what you've done.
Okay, my name's Kevin Nicholson. Currently I play left back for Torquay United. Signed my first professional contract at 17 at Sheffield Wednesday and spent 3 years there without any great success breaking into the first team. Played one game, came on as substitute for Andy Hinchcliffe against Blackburn at Hillsborough, but it didn't really work out, and from there I went on to basically kind of non-contract terms at Northampton. I signed for Northampton and Forest Green at the same time, and after 2 games with Forest Green got to make my debut for Northampton, which was actually coming on as a substitute for a certain Chris Hargreaves. I've got video evidence. But I only ended up playing 6 games for Northampton because I was on non-contract. It basically meant that after 7 days they could get rid of me, or I could put my 7 days notice in, and one of my first starts was against Notts County, and that had gone particularly well personally, and they came in with a firm contract offer, which as a young footballer, having left Sheffield Wednesday in the comfort of being there for so many years, and then going out into the unknown on non-contract terms, which you knew at any time could blow up in your face, it was nice to have all of a sudden, you know, Northampton then came in with a counter offer, and I'd gone from a complete position of weakness to being in a position of power at the time.
Fantastic. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal life, family and hobbies and interests and where you live?
Yeah, I live in Torquay, just up in the Willows. I've got a wife, Jenny, and 2 kids, a little girl called Jessica and a little boy called Leo. To be honest, when you go into hobbies nowadays, it's basically a wife called Jenny and 2 kids. If I get any spare time, I like to have a game of golf. There's a few of the lads that like to do it. There used to be a real golfing culture in football, but that's died out a bit with the introduction of Medal of Honor and all these computer games that people go crazy for. But yeah, you know, we love living down here, taking the kids to the beach 5 minutes away. You know, all the walks that you can do, all the outdoor stuff, which, you know, you can't do when you're living in the middle of Sheffield and places like that. It's quite a privilege really to be able to, you know, go and walk around Cockington and take in all the stuff that you can around Torquay.
And although we're going to rewind and go through in a bit more depth your career, what are your future aspirations, Kevin?
Well, I'm 31 now. I signed a new contract that takes me for another couple of seasons after this one. But knowing that you only get one chance of playing, I want to play on as long as I can. My ideas on that have changed fairly recently, because I always thought I'd be the player that would keep on playing, and once I wasn't good enough for League 2, I would go and play in the conference, and once I couldn't do that anymore, I'd just keep on playing further and further down the pyramid because I just love playing the game. But to be honest, I think I've been a bit spoilt while I've been at Torquay. You know, we've played big games in front of big crowds and on good pitches, and I think now I'm a little bit more inclined that if the time comes where I'm deemed not good enough to play at a professional level, I will probably then look at moving on into what I want to do after football, which really, right at this current moment, is coaching and management.
And I'd like to say on the record that you have inspired my 12-year-old son when he's been part of your training session up in the Centre of Excellence, and you've definitely got some wonderful coaching attributes.
But yeah, it was a good bunch of kids that I was training with, and I've enjoyed doing it. I've been going down. I wanted to do a lot more, but with my second child, Leo, coming along this year, I was going fairly regularly down there on a Monday, and then Leo came along, and so did the lack of sleep and all the rest of it, and it died off a little bit. But that's something that I'll be doing a lot more of.
Kevin, how do you think that players generally deal with what the future holds?
Denial. I think that generally, as a kid, you get told over and over again by anybody that's been in the game and anybody that's coaching you, you get told that you've got such a short career and it flies by. And you take it on board, but at the same time, you don't really realise how quick they're talking about. You know, it was probably only 2 or 3 years ago that I seriously started considering what I would want to do after football. And when I say seriously start considering, I mean just going through it in my mind, not actually putting stuff forward, not doing things like courses. I mean, I'd done my coaching badges and stuff, but I did that because it was something that I knew I could do, and I've always thought I wanted to do coaching, but never committed to it. But you know, while you've got the time you have when you're playing, it's good to get out there and do a few things, and coaching was the natural thing for me to do because I enjoyed it. But generally players don't realise how quickly it can turn. I mean, you can sign in lower league football at the moment, a 2-year contract is massive security. Now in any other walk of life, that's really not a lot to go on, but players seem to just take it year by year, and then when the end of that contract comes about, start panicking that they might not get another one, and then things get difficult.
Yeah. If you were not a footballer, or let's assume that when of course the playing career comes to an end, if you did not go into coaching and it had to be a career or anything outside football, what sort of things would you look at? What sort of things maybe have you thought about?
Well, when I've thought about this, I've always gone down the route of I'd quite like to have things like it's a bit random, but I've always thought I'd quite like things like a coffee shop or a restaurant or something like that. But I haven't got the first idea where I would even start with something like that. It was more the image of, I like the idea of having my own place and being my own boss. But because football is all I've known, everything has always come back around to football, and there's not that many players that want to stay in it because football as an industry isn't great. You know, you have a lot of down times and you come across a lot of people that would stamp all over you to get where they're going, and not that many people that are willing to help you out. So I've become inspired to try and want to stay in football, to change it for the better, because I feel that within my career I've played for more managers that, I wouldn't like to say bad managers, but I've seen more bad management than I have good, and I think you can learn a lot from that. But I mean, my dad was a policeman, and you always go down the lines of what your parents had done, so that might have been something I thought about. But yeah, it's really tough to say, because I mean, I went to Lilleshall when I was 14 on like a football scholarship, so I mean literally from leaving home at 14, football is all I've ever done.
What would you consider, this is where you get to praise yourself.
I'm good at that.
To tell us about some of your other attributes.
Other attributes? Oh, in what sense?
Well, presumably if you perhaps have had a vision of, for example, having a coffee shop, you must be good at putting the kettle on.
Well, yeah, I think that I like to see myself as a fairly comfortable, confident guy that can talk to most people without much of a problem. I think people skills is probably something that I would fancy my chances at, although in football you don't have to really do much of that. But yeah, I enjoy interacting with people, I enjoy conversation, I enjoy good debate, and so really it's hard to say in terms of attributes, because most things have been, you know, I'm mentally strong, I know that because I've managed to stay in football for 17 or 15 years. So I know that I can deal with most things and come out the other side, because virtually all footballers have gone through that period where they're not wanted and get cast out, and then it's up to you to pick yourself up and go again.
What would you say to a younger player now then, Kev? What would you, because I coach at an age group that's pretty impressionable, and their lives are very difficult away from football sometimes. What would you say to a younger player? What would you give him some advice about his future in football? Would you say keep the dream alive, or would you say?
Yeah, you see, that's the thing. I'm torn on that two ways, because the sensible part of me would say make sure. Well, I mean, don't get me wrong. All part of me would say make sure that you do your education, make sure that you do right at school, make sure that you do things properly in that sense. But if you've got something that you want to do that bad, then and especially something like football, which even if you get into it, you've got 15 years if you're lucky as a player. For me, you've got to, if you really genuinely want to do it, you've got to dedicate yourself to getting where you've got to be.
And you can't see anything else, can you?
And you've got to take on advice, you've got to listen to what people have got to say, but at the same time, you've got to make sure that you do whatever it takes extra to be that much better than the guy next to you. Because anybody that's been in football at any level has sat around in a group and the manager's said, out of this team, maybe one of you will make it. And that's being generous. And I've been there, and I was there. I mean, people at Lillishall, I was sat with, at the time, the best 16 players in the country, and we were 15, so it wasn't that we were, 9, 10-year-olds and there was a long way to go. You were 2 years away from becoming a professional if you were lucky enough. And the same thing got said there. You're not all going to make it, so you've got to make sure that you do your schoolwork, you do everything right, you grow as a person and all the rest of it, because football can make you quite bitter.
These chats are vital to have with a certain age, because if you do go for it and you've got your dream, which you carry on with, and it doesn't work out at 16, 17, then you were the fortunate one. So was I. We got through and had a career. But the lads that don't are very disappointed, and then they've got no trade, no education, and that's difficult.
But because A, because you're young, and B, because you've always gone for football. When that happens, it seems like that's the end of that. But obviously, for instance, with me, I went to Lillishall, and when I was 16, I was deemed the best left back in the country by the people that got me there. I got in, so therefore, in that sense, at the time, I was the best left back there. So in my head, there's only one thing: I was going to go and play in the Premier League, and I was going to earn thousands of pounds a week, because that's all you think. You don't consider when you're coming up through the ranks, especially when you're at a Premier League team. You don't look at a club like Torquay, for argument's sake, and think, wow, I'd be privileged to play there for 5 years, because it's League Two football. And even now, we get players come on loan from Premier League clubs, and it's a culture shock, because they see a training ground that isn't immaculate, they see a ground that's been through the mill a little bit, they see a first team pitch that isn't covered in grass like they're used to, and it's a culture shock to them, because it's not, everything's not there for you. You have to bring your own slips and your own towels and things like that.
No, it's still absolutely
brilliant. But and it took me a while after I dropped out of the Premier League. I didn't give up on playing in the Premier League until I was 27, and we got promoted back into League Two with Torquay, and a right winger got the ball and ran at me, and the guy on the touchline said, "Run at him because he can't move." And at that point, at the time, we'd lost a few games. At that point, I thought, yeah, that was our manager. But at that point, genuinely, honestly, at that point, I thought, you know what, I'm probably not going to play in the Premier League anymore, because you can be as dedicated as you want to be, you can be mentally, you can be absolutely on it. But unfortunately, in the Premier League, if you're not an athlete and you're not quick or big or strong or all of them, you're probably not going to play in the Premier League. Now, there are exceptions out there, because, I mean, look at Messi. He wouldn't, in the English game, if he was a 14-year-old like he was over there, he would probably get written off for being too small. But he is an exception to the rule. But for the most part, as you work your way up, like I say, having played in the conference, you come across, as a left back, you come across two types of players. You come up against a winger, and usually they're either really quick, but they can't cross the ball, or they're really good on the ball, but they're physically not very good. And as you get higher and higher, those things start to get, he's still quick and now he can cross the ball. And then you look at the Premier League and they're all absolutely rapid. They're all strong, they're all ripped to pieces. And it wasn't until I was 27 till I gave up on the dream of playing the Premier League. Because up until then, all I had focused on was that I was going to get back up to where that was going to be. And then the realisation comes through that, well, actually, I've been a professional for 10 years. I've done nothing but play football. I've gone in every morning, I've trained for a couple of hours, and I've enjoyed it, even when I've been playing for teams that have been at the wrong end of the league, sorry. I've enjoyed every minute of it. I've met good people, I've met some not so good people, I've learned from that. I keep myself fit for a living and get paid for it, and I mean, what more do you want?
No, nothing. And for those of you who those are people that don't know you as well as I do, you are a classic pro, aren't you? You do it right.
If you go back to what you were saying earlier about attributes, I do everything in my power to make sure that I'm as good as what I can be with what I've got. And that is what all you can do as any player. And if you're a 14-year-old kid and you've got aspirations to go in the Premier League and you do everything right, and as it happens you end up playing part-time football and earning 150 quid a week to spend at a weekend with your mates and getting a job, then you can't look back when you're 35 and you can't play anymore. You can't look back with any regrets. And all I've ever focused on from the moment I started playing was that when I'm 35 I won't look back and think, oh God, I wish I'd have done that, because that would be painful, because there's no going back. Now I know that where I may have been limited physically as a footballer, when it comes to management and coaching, it's all mental, it's all in your mind, it's all how you treat people, it's all how you talk. So it doesn't matter if I'm not very quick, and it doesn't matter if I'm not 6 foot tall. I can do that, and I can do it to the level of ability that I can push onto, and I'm fairly confident that I'll be able to do that.
Can I ask you, Kevin, with a lot of players that go through the game, and this is over the years thousands, there is a lot of uncertainty and vulnerability. How do you think the game should be structured to help players, or should they be structured? Should it be more structured, or is it a case of, I mean, we're talking to you on film with a view to giving you a bit of a showpiece video. If you were to then be making contact with prospective employers, or even if you're looking at having your own business in the future, this is still a good showpiece video for you. And I'm wondering what it's like for so many players that go through those tougher times, that maybe are not as mentally strong as you, for example, and as Chris as well. What do we do about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, at the moment, you know the PFA, you know that the PFA are there and they're your union and that they'll help you out, and they offer the courses that you can do. And in fairness, again, they're also part of this, you know, this group of people that tell you need to plan for after. But it's like, I mean, I suppose it's similar to football at our level. It's all right telling someone that they need to do something, but there's no guidance of doing it. I mean, we've got players that last year, for instance, the manager would go up to and say, look, you know, you're a bit heavy, you need to lose some weight. Well, it's all right telling a player that, but if a player isn't educated in that, and the player doesn't know what he needs to do to lose weight, and then isn't actually helped to do it by somebody that knows what they're on about, then you can tell that player that he needs to lose weight over and over again, but it's not actually going to change his mindset. It's not going to help him. And certainly last year, we were very good at identifying, as a club, we were good at identifying what other players needed to work on, what weaknesses there were, but just pointing at someone and saying you need to do that without then giving them the knowledge, the backup, and then the continuing help to carry on doing it, they're not going to get there. And the same goes with, you know, players find themselves told by a manager quite early on, you know, you're not wanted at the club anymore. It happened to me the season we got promoted at Torquay. I was told specifically by the manager, I was sat down in an office and said, look, I don't think you're good enough for League Two. There won't be a contract for you. And that was in December. And I was told again in late January. You know, he sat me down, he said, you know the score, you know, you've been great for the club, but I don't think you're good enough for this level, and so there won't be anything there for you. Now, when a player hears that, that's devastating news, because you think, well, that's it. Now, because I'd been there before, and because when you're at a club down in the levels we're at, squads aren't big enough. My mindset was, squads aren't big enough that they can carry on carrying me as a passenger without eventually me getting in. And if I didn't get back in, then I'd be playing somewhere else, because I was confident that even if it was the league below or 2 leagues below, I would be playing somewhere else. So I went away and worked hard and all the rest of it. But some players take that news as, well, that's that. And then they're left nowhere. They've got the family, hopefully, and the friends that can back them up and put their arm around them. But there's nothing anyone can do. You can have an agent, you can speak to the PFA. There's nothing anyone can do to guarantee that at the end of that season you're going to have a club elsewhere, because nobody's looking at that point, because they're focused on the rest of the season and whether they're going to be trying to stay up, whether they're going to be trying to get promoted, whatever position they're in. You won't get any reassurances from anyone till the season's finished, and then you know that you're going to be in a pool of 800 players that are out of work, or vying for minimal places. So
going back to that, Kev, about the thing you said earlier about the chat perhaps once a season about the things that are available, would it be helpful to have a support more regularly to the players, something that would say, okay, you can do this, and then a couple of months later, are you doing this? A couple of months later, please do this.
Yeah, because
a player coming in and saying, look, at the end of your contract, you're going to have no job, and you'll go from good money to no money immediately.
Yeah.
And you'll need to provide for your family if you have one. So what are you going to do?
Yeah, you get told. There's no two ways about it. You get told that you should plan for after football, whether that after football is 10 years from now or the end of the season. But yeah, I mean, these people come in and they tell you that there are courses available, but the message probably isn't clear enough, and the footballers that it gets told to, the players in general, no one thinks it's going to be them. No one, when you're sat in that meeting, whether you're 10 and they're telling you that only one of you are going to make it, I guarantee that all 16 players sat around there thinking, well, I'm that one. Nobody wants to believe that when the end of your time comes that you're really not going to be in football anymore. I mean, I want to stay in coaching, I want to stay in management, but it's not that easy. I know that the time isn't going to come where the manager says, look, I'm sorry, you're not getting a contract, and I'm just going to walk into a coaching job. So, you know, I look at other avenues of what I'm going to do, but I just think that people coming in a bit more regularly and people helping players understand that they're in a position where they've got lots of time while they're playing to go away and do something and qualify in something, do a course. It doesn't have to be anything too serious, something that they enjoy doing, but just to guide them a little bit and show them that it's not going to eat away into their social time and all the rest of it. It's just something that they can do, have done by the time the end of the year comes, or 2 years, however long the course is, and then it's there, and then they've got something then that they can go away and with what you guys are talking about, to actually have a CV up and go. I mean, my CV's not been changed since I was 16 and I left school with it.
You're in denial about your age then?
Pretty much, yeah.
Kevin, I just want your opinion on this. We're coming to the end of the interview. What we're wanting to achieve with Be Champions is a working relationship with various football organisations and clubs to reach out to lots of players and ex-players, and to offer this by way of a video biography so that individuals have that shop window, and also a proper support service whereby people like myself and Chris and a team of other experienced consultants and business people can be here for you, for example, for the rest of your working life, with a structure in place for you to be able to have support, advice, mentoring, and if you want to go into your own business and you really want to know how to go about opening up a cafe, then we can introduce you to key people who can give you specific advice on that. And if you were looking for another job, whether it be in football, sport, or completely different, we would be able to work with other prospective employers to help make an introduction for you. If that sort of service was provided across the country, and for you, for example, how would you feel about that?
I'd feel very good about it. I'd be more than happy with it. I think the biggest thing that happens, and it's not just with what you're talking about, it's with, say, a sports psychologist comes into a football club. The biggest problem you have, and it probably goes back to the question that Chris was asking about the support system and all the rest of it, if Chris came into our football club now and told us about his story and what happened when he finished playing, and then told us about your idea and Be Champions and all the rest of it, he would get people to listen, because people have an instant respect for the fact that he's played the game, played it recently, and knows what he's talking about. What you find in football a lot of the time is that the people that come and talk to you about these things are either completely unrelated to football, and immediately all footballers look at that and think, well, what does he know? or ex-footballers from 30 years ago, which some of us look at and think, you've got to hear what he's saying. But if you're an 18-year-old and a guy comes in who was a legend at Man U 40 years ago, and I use that as an example because our PFA rep is a legend that plays for Man U, 30, 40 years ago, that all the young lads look at and they don't know. They don't see him as an ex-footballer. He's just a guy that's doing his job for the PFA. Sure. You don't get the hooks in like you would if Chris Hargreaves turned up to do it, if a current footballer who's actually maybe gone through this process and seen how it works. And obviously I don't know yet how it works because it's not set up. But if someone who's actually seen the results, if someone who's recently finished a career, Wayne Carlisle, someone who's recently finished a career, now Wayne was lucky that he fell onto the job that he's doing now and loves it. But somebody like that has got to be the person that first makes contact with footballers. Because, no disrespect, but if you went to go and talk to the Torquay United team and you sat them down in a room like this, you would have 2 minutes before 99% of them switched off completely and started thinking, not because you're not talking sense, not because you've not got a good product, and not because you've got a good point. It's because football at the moment, we get the odd person that comes in who's a football psychologist, and they're obviously intelligent people, and football psychology and sports psychology could and should be a massive thing. But they come in, and it's happened to me 2 or 3 times now, they come in and they think the best way to relate to a footballer is to swear a bit more than usual. And that's serious. People come in and they just F and blind a little bit more than what they would in any other walk of life because they think that will relate to a footballer. And again, they just get laughed out of the room because they haven't got a football background. They might have worked in the game for 30 years. They might know more than what anybody sat in the room knows about the game. But because they didn't play, they don't seem to get the respect that they maybe deserve because of what they're talking about. And I think that's when the PFA come round and tell us about the courses that they're going to do, they may as well just send a load of booklets and stop and not waste the time from coming around themselves and hand the booklets out because they'll have the same effect. And unless you get somebody, and like I say, Chris is the best example because some of the lads at the club played with him, and certainly anyone at the club knows who he is because he's local around here. He only finished playing a year or 2 ago. He's picked us up all around the club. Immediately people will listen to what he's got to say. And if he comes in and tells them that he finished 2 years ago and it was a culture shock even to someone like him, that all of a sudden you've gone from good money, great lifestyle, and now you're working 18 hours a day for less money than what you were doing for 18 hours a week, that's going to have a bigger effect and get more people to listen initially than anything else.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, and we've had these conversations. The way that Be Champions is going to be set up will be that contemporary footballers will be going into football clubs to make the initial contact, then with a view to individuals sitting down like yourself, Kevin, and having a video profile put together, and we will then structure a support service around that to look at everything that relates to your future aspirations, whether it be self-employed or looking at employability. So that's fantastic, and really appreciate this. Thank you very much indeed, Kevin.